Awesome, awesome. So yeah, as I just said, this is about racism and public health crisis and how you guys plan to follow up. So my first question is like, how uh, how would you describe racism as a public health crisis? What made it become a public health crisis in Washtenaw County?
Well, we know, we would argue that racism is a public health crisis everywhere, not just in Washtenaw County,
Hmm.
and that we really want to be purposeful in Washtenaw County about identifying problems and identifying them correctly, because that's how you can put appropriate resources behind it. So our Board of Health and then us as the Board of Commissioners took the step to officially declare racism as a public health crisis. One, so that the public understands that we are taking it very seriously, that we are making this public statement, but then also tying resources to addressing it as a public health crisis. So it was never just for us to make a statement. It was us saying we're going to declare it as a public health crisis, and then we're going to also commit the funds to addressing it as such.
Okay, so before we get to the resources and what made what resources you guys are putting behind it, was there a particular issue where people just said enough is enough and we have to move forward with declaring this as a public health crisis, particularly in our city?
I don't think there was a particular thing that triggered people to start. We have to do this.
Hmm.
Just Washtenaw County as a whole, like our government is really focused on equity and racial equity, and that's why we created a racial equity office.
Hmm.
So it is not our intention to have the racial equity office just be the one component of county government that's working to advance racial equity. All county departments are looking at that, and this was the health department's way, I think, of getting on board with committing to racial equity work.
Okay, okay, awesome, awesome. So yeah, you said the racial equity work. Is that the main resource you guys are putting behind to follow up on this?
No, it's not. So the health department has its own set of initiatives to address racism as a public health crisis, and then us as a county government, we run a lot of our initiatives through the racial equity office. But we want each of our additional departments and offices looking at how they can be involved in the work as well. If I'm remembering correctly, I think our community mental health has a Black Lives Matter task force, for example. So the racial equity work is happening in other departments too.
Nice, nice. So, what policies are you guys looking to put in place to ensure um, things are stepping up in terms of racial equality?
Yeah, so a lot of it is coming down to we have we have an equity policy, and then we have the racial equity office that's taking a look at all of our policies and procedures, and then the other pieces of it come down to being purposeful about how we allocate funds, and then the kinds of services that we're doing. So to give you a few examples, knowing that the pandemic hit our 48197 and 48198 zip codes the hardest, and that it disproportionately affected our Black and Brown communities, we were really purposeful in making sure that we targeted our vaccine distribution and then PPE and other supplies to the areas that we know were hardest hit. And that was a joint effort between our Racial Equity Office, our Health Department, and our Office of Community and Economic Development.
Nice, nice. So have you been working with any nonprofits to further this initiative or further any additional initiatives?
So I would say at the county level,
Mhm.
one of the resolutions that I was able to get us to pass within my first 100 days in office was a resolution that commits the county to using the Opportunity Index. The Opportunity Index is this tool that we have that maps opportunity across a number of different metrics. So health outcomes, educational attainment, job access, and so on. And it's like a color coded map where areas that are lower opportunity are more red, and then higher opportunities are bluer. So I got us to pass a resolution that makes the Board of Commissioners, county departments, and county administration, and then when we work with nonprofit partners, they also have to use the Opportunity Index to guide our policy and our programmatic decisions. So if we're doing work with a nonprofit, they have to look at where are the areas that are most in need, where are the lower opportunity areas, and then they have to target funds in that way. Right? I mean, it's something that comes before us. When we look at the cover memo, for example, of anything that we're passing, there's a section on there that talks about the impact on equity and what the opportunity index says. So, at a broader, like I'm thinking more broadly about how do we ingrain the racial equity work into our policy work, so this is just something that happens automatically. So it's ingrained really in our DNA as an organization.
Nice, nice. And I read that Washtenaw, I believe, is less than 12% Black. Um, and in terms of like Asian Americans, they're less than 9%. Um, when it comes to your index, do those like more red areas reflect this, where more of the population is condensed into the more red areas, or the more in need pop areas, if you will?
Unfortunately, in large parts of the county, that is the case. So when we're looking at the 48197 and 48198 zip codes, those are areas where there are more people of color, and those tend to be right now some of the lower opportunity areas. So we've seen some movement. Something else that's part of the resolution that I got us to pass is ongoing program evaluation and then reassessment of the tool so we can map the progress that we're making. But yes, that is something that we're seeing, and that's why the work of the Racial Equity Office and the racial equity work that our health department is doing is so important, because some of that is just comes down to just, I mean, structurally, things that have happened with how our communities have been constructed over time. Like for example, we know that some of those areas that I mentioned have higher rates of asthma. So it's not a coincidence that when we're seeing poor health outcomes in our Black and Brown communities, that there's greater pollution in those areas, or there's a highway right in that area, and that affects all of that.
Okay, and yeah, in 2020, I read that Washtenaw County did rank 80 out of 83 in terms of income inequality. What have you guys been doing to try to make this better?
Yeah, that's a good question. So combating economic inequality is one of my top issues. A project I had been working on since before I got elected, that I was able to get to the finish line after getting elected, was
Mhm.
for us to start a countywide children's savings accounts program. So with this program that we're gonna start enrolling all kids in Washtenaw County public schools this coming school year in a savings account program for college, trade school, any kind of post-secondary education. And I really wanted it to be equity focused. So for the kids that get free or reduced lunch, they're going to get a $500 seed to their account, as opposed to the $25 minimum for the other accounts.
Mhm.
So that's one tool that we're using to really be able to target, one, the school districts that we know are struggling a bit more, and then homes that we know are struggling a bit more. I've also been pushing for us to start a financial empowerment center. I'm pretty confident we're going to get to the finish line on that by the end of the year, and that would provide a number of things such as free financial counseling, programming to help connect families that are either unbanked or underbanked with traditional financial services. I'm hoping that we'll have some sort of debt matching fund. So for families that are struggling in a cycle of debt, and they want to pay some of that back, the county will be able to support with that. Also looking for us to be able to have a down payment assistance fund, because we know that a person's home, and home is their largest asset generally, and home ownership is a way to disrupt generational poverty. So looking at that as a way to help people be able to build some generational wealth, but also to combat the affordable housing crisis that we're seeing.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is about the unemployment and the homelessness within the Black community or just the minority community in general. Um, you did answer that just now. So when it comes to, let's say, not only just able minorities but disabled minorities, are you guys putting in any type of policies to try to combat that as well to assist them in their struggles?
Absolutely. So one of the components that we passed of, so governments across the country received large sums of money from the federal government as part of the American Rescue Plan. In
Mhm.
Washtenaw County, we have allocated those funds through different, what we call Washtenaw Rescue Plan packages.
Mhm.
We had a rescue plan package that was really focused on health equity, and that included funds for a variety of different kinds of programming, that range from increasing our network of community health workers. We know community health workers are, evidence shows that they are a tremendous resource for improving health outcomes. So by us investing more in that, we'll be able to embed community health workers in some of the neighborhoods and the areas in the county where we typically see lower health outcomes and change that. Uh, we're also really focused on changing our service delivery model. So for people that have challenges with transportation, for whether it's because they don't have reliable transportation or they're homebound for other reasons, we're really looking to be able to deliver services directly to people. So a couple of projects within that kind of realm we're looking at. One of them is, we've largely used this throughout the pandemic, but the health department has a mobile clinic. It's this really cool looking RV.
Mhm.
And we've used that to distribute PPE and do vaccinations. So we were doing one of our goals, or the way that we approach making sure we were vaccinating people in the areas hardest hit, is through pop-up vaccination clinics, and we use the mobile RV for that. The other nice thing about the RV, though, is it's equipped to provide many of the other health department services. So WIC, sexual health services, wide variety of services. We've committed some funding to be able to make sure that there's staffing to be able to use the RV in that way as well. We're also looking at doing this other program called the Mobile Support Services Initiative. And what that looks like is the county's acquired 2 buses that we're going to be retrofitting to allow service providers, either from the county, so you could think health department staff or community mental health staff, other staff, but also community partners. So potentially people from maybe food gatherers or other nonprofits. And then they'll be able to ride these buses around, and the buses will go to areas in the county that could benefit from those services. And then we'll be able to deliver service providers directly into those neighborhoods. So those are a couple of the things that we're doing to really figure out how do we take services directly to people where they're at.
Nice, nice. I really appreciate that. And one of my final questions was involving statistics. How has this impacted these neighborhoods? More on a statistical standpoint, have you seen any growth or any increase within like the issue of declaring that racism is a public health issue or
Yeah,
public health?
that's a great question. So one of the things that we're doing right now is, as part of the funding we received from the federal government through the American Rescue Plan, we
Mhm,
have to do specific kinds of program evaluation and reporting on that.
mhm,
So we're going to be able to give you much better data and how those metrics are changing over time, because we're going to have staff dedicated to doing that kind of work.
mhm.
We also have, I don't know if anybody sent you this website we have, it's Health for All Washtenaw. I'll send you a link there, but there's a bunch
Okay,
of different
please. Mhm.
stats on there as well that'd be helpful. So my hope is that through the use of the program evaluators and also the use of the opportunity index as a measurement tool, we'll be able to track these improvements over time. What I expect will be improvements, because
Yeah,
we're really focused on allocating funds in that way.
nice, nice. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on my next question. I don't know why. But when it comes to I- I'm sorry, I just
That's
completely
okay.
blanked on my next
Take
question.
time.
Oh, yeah, it's about future initiatives.
Yeah.
What are the future plans that you have that you're trying to lay out in place to further combat what you're experiencing right now, or what Washington's experiencing?
Yeah, so I see the affordable housing crisis and a lot of the economic inequality that we've talked about, that is purely a racial justice issue. So my hope is that the start of the Financial Empowerment Center, which would be this component of this larger financial equity center that we'll be starting,
Mhm.
that'll help us from the financial and the economic perspective. Really looking for community mental health and the health department to continue the work that they're doing to expand services. You'll be talking to the health officer, I think, if you haven't already talked
Yeah,
to her. And
tomorrow.
tomorrow, okay. A project that the health department is working on now. We're in the process of starting it. It's called Anti-Racist City and County Towards Justice Project. So ARC Towards Justice is what the acronym is, and that's a partnership with the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan and some of our other committees within the health department. We have a group within the health department called Community Voices for Health Equity, and they're a group of community members from different parts of the county that advise us on equity issues. So this new project is going to be a partnership with the School of Public Health, Community Voices, and then the health department to figure out how can the health department one, explore itself internally around where can they do more anti-racist work within itself as an organization, and then how do they do more anti-racist work within our community.
Nice, nice. And my last question is there anything else you would like to tell the public in regards to just this overall issue in general, or what you're doing to further combat it?
Yeah, we, in addition to looking at racism or declaring racism as a public health crisis, we're looking at all the different components that flow from that as well. So we, at our recent Board of Health meeting, we had a conversation about gun violence as a public health issue, and what can we do to combat that? Because we know that gun violence in Washtenaw County, about 85% of the shootings that we have in Washtenaw County are retaliatory in nature. And we feel like if we know it's retaliatory, we should be able to predict it, we should be able to intervene and save lives. And we've done some work as a county already to try to combat gun violence. We've allocated about $2 million towards violence interruption work, and we're going to continue doing more of that. But we also know that a large number of the shootings that occur in our county are kids that are getting guns out of unlocked cars and then shooting at each other. So we're looking at a wide variety of these components that make up these various crises that we see in our county, and following through by allocating resources to it.
Wait. All right. So I got more questions. All right. So what made you determine that this was a major crisis that need to be addressed? Was the gun violence?
Yeah, well, I live in one of the neighborhoods where we see a lot of gun violence.
Hmm.
There was actually a board of commissioners meeting back when we were meeting on Zoom, when we were allowed to meet on Zoom.
Yeah.
There was a shooting that occurred down the street from my house during a board of commissioners meeting, and I had to step away from the meeting, which and then talk to deputies as they came by, which I think put the issue into perspective for the commissioners that represent other parts of the county. So that's part of it, and we know that it's putting our kids at risk, largely our Black and brown kids at risk, and we need to do something about that. Like, as a commissioner that represents part of the county that sees this challenge with gun violence, it's one of my top priorities.
Nice. And is there been any progression along with this so far?
Yeah, so I joined with a group shortly after I got elected, of other elected officials and community leaders, putting our heads together to think about how do we combat this as an issue. And that culminated in us coming up with these, in addition to consulting with experts on this, it culminated in these 14 recommendations that the group put out, as ways for us as a county government, but also for other people in the community to combat gun violence. And as a result of that, one, we made the commitment to allocate funding to this, and that's where some of the commitment around the $2 million that we've already allocated comes from,
Hmm.
and then us doing more work on that.
Nice. And I do believe that is all the questions I have. I thank you very much for this, sir.
Hey, thank you for your interest. If you ever have other things you have questions about or want to chat further, just let me know.
Absolutely, sir. All right, so I'm about to end recording right now.
Okay.